A clear, peaceful afternoon turned into a nightmare any mother could face, just because of skin color, just because of a cruel prejudice woven deep into the system. When Naomi took her two sons to the park for a rare moment of peace, she had no idea that a pair of prejudiced eyes at a picnic table just a few meters away was watching her every move. She didn't know a malicious 911 call had been made simply because a black woman didn't look like she belonged with those kids. And she didn't know that only minutes later, her life and her children's innocence would be torn apart by suspicion, humiliation, and the unchecked power of people who wore badges but lacked humanity. Can you even imagine? A mother playing with her kids, treated like a criminal. A 6-year-old screaming as he watched his mother's wrist being grabbed. A 12-year-old stepping in front of his little brother, knees shaking, trying to be brave when he shouldn't have to. And the cruelest part? Those officers had no idea they'd just laid hands on a federal agent, a woman who had sworn to protect this country, yet wasn't protected by the very country she served when she needed it most. Why is a mother, an agent, a citizen, seen as a threat in a public park because of her skin color? Why must two innocent children witness their mother being humiliated in front of them? Why were the people meant to protect the very ones spreading fear? This story isn't just about Naomi. It's about millions of people of color who have trembled under suspicious eyes. About countless children forced to grow up with nameless fear. About a system too comfortable with covering up, staying silent, and protecting each other instead of protecting justice. But what those officers didn't expect, it was that Naomi was not the kind of woman who bows her head. And everything that happened after, the legal war, the attacks in the dark, the moment the entire community rose up, will leave you unable to look away. You'll want to know. How did a single mother fight an entire system determined to break her? What made an entire city erupt? And what happened on the night they tried to silence her forever? Watch until the end, because the truth behind this story is more brutal than you think, and its hope even stronger than its pain. If you care about stories revealing the hidden reality of racism in America, stories that make your heart ache but also ignite your fire for justice, then subscribe to Racist Reality right now. You won't want to miss what comes next. On that Juneteenth afternoon in Atlanta, the sunlight unfolded in a gentle glow, soft, warm, like a quiet promise. Piedmont Park stretched beneath a smooth blue sky, where the sounds of children chasing one another blended with the chirping of birds nesting in the wide branches overhead. In the midst of it all, Naomi Williams sat on a wooden bench, her fingers interlaced, allowing herself a rare moment to breathe without the weight of the world pressing down on her. After years in the FBI, she had grown used to the relentless rhythm, dark case files, suffocating pressure, and sleepless nights. But today wasn't for emergency calls or back-to-back briefings. Today was for Malik and Zion, the two boys who were the only world she never allowed herself to lose. Malik, 13 years old, sat cross-legged on the grass, eating ice cream while scribbling in a worn sketchbook. His eyes were deep and beautiful, but older, sadder than any child's should be. His drawings were more than images. They were fragments of memory he feared he wouldn't get to keep because his mother was always busy. But today, he wasn't drawing to hold on. He was drawing to celebrate. "Mom, remember to smile," Malik said without looking up, as if he could read her mood from the breath she had just let out. Zion, 4 years younger and brimming with energy, darted around with a small ball, kicking it and laughing with pure delight. His smile was the kind that softened anyone who saw it, a smile untouched by the world's cruelty. Naomi looked at Zion, then at Malik, and her heart expanded, softened, but also ached in a way she couldn't quite name. Maybe because she knew how fragile peace was, so fragile that a single wrong glance, a single baseless accusation, could shatter it. She inhaled deeply and leaned back against the bench. "You know," Naomi said, Juneteenth is the day our ancestors were freed, and today, I want both of you to feel truly free. Zion ran up and wrapped his arms around her leg, his eyes bright like flecks of sunlight. I am free, Mommy. I have you and Malik. Naomi laughed, running her fingers through his soft curls. Malik finally looked up, his eyes clear but shadowed by something older than his years. Being free means nobody makes you feel small, right, Mom? The question made Naomi freeze. Malik was old enough now to ask things children should never have to think about. Naomi wanted to say, yes, wanted to say, no one has the right to make you feel less than or suspicious just because you're a black boy. But her throat tightened. Instead, she placed a hand on his shoulder and gave it a gentle squeeze, an assurance she wasn't entirely sure she could promise. Malik held her gaze for another heartbeat, then bent back over his sketchbook. He was drawing the three of them under this very tree. Soft lines, gentle strokes. Zion ran back into the grass and kicked the ball toward Naomi. She caught the messy kick in a clumsy motion that made all three of them burst into laughter. Malik's bright laugh, Zion's delighted shout, and the moment Naomi forgot she was Agent Williams. All of it came together in a small, tender piece of happiness. In the distance, everything looked normal. Joggers, couples holding hands, a few white families having lunch. No one seemed to notice the three of them. And Naomi wanted to believe it was because they were simply harmless in everyone's eyes, not because they had learned to make themselves smaller. A light breeze swept through, carrying the smell of freshly cut grass and the vibrant sounds of summer. In that fleeting moment, Naomi felt something rare, safety, delicate, fragile, but real enough that she wanted to hold on to it tightly, as if the world couldn't touch her or her boys. She didn't know that in just a few minutes that peace, soft and fleeting, would be torn apart. Brutally, suddenly, in a way only a black mother in America could understand. None of the three, Naomi or her boys, knew that at a wooden picnic table only a few dozen steps away, a single prejudiced gaze was quietly tightening around their peace. A white couple, neatly dressed, polished in that familiar American suburban way, sat beside a luxurious picnic basket. But instead of enjoying the holiday, the wife's eyes never left Naomi and the children. It wasn't accidental, it wasn't curiosity. It was judgment, scrutiny, suspicion soaked in a long history of fearing black skin. The husband tried to focus on his sandwich, but kept getting pulled into his wife's discomfort. She leaned in, whispering in a tone meant to sound discreet, yet sharp enough to slice through the air itself. They don't look like her kids. Those children, they don't resemble her at all. Quiet words, but loud enough to tear a hole in the peaceful sky Naomi thought she had managed to hold on to. Malik heard it. His 13-year-old shoulders tensed and the pencil slipped from his fingers. In his eyes flickered a feeling every black mother dreads seeing in her child. The realization that the world doesn't view them as harmless children, but as questions. Questions that demand justification. Naomi heard it too, and her heart clenched, not because she hadn't heard words like that before, but because her son had. She turned to Malik, trying to offer a reassuring smile, but it trembled. A mother knows there are wounds she cannot simply erase by holding her child close. The wife glanced over again, this time with even sharper displeasure. She pulled out her phone, shielding it with her hand but making no real effort to hide what she was doing. There's a black woman, acting suspicious, with 2 children. She spoke into the phone. I'm not sure they're hers. Zion kept running after his ball, blissfully unaware. But Naomi heard every syllable. Malik heard every syllable. And suddenly Piedmont Park felt smaller, heavier. The sky was still blue, still beautiful, yet somehow fractured. Naomi closed her eyes for a moment. She inhaled slowly, steadying her voice as she told Malik, "Don't let them steal your joy. Look at me." But the eyes that had been so full of innocence that morning were now shaded by something older, something that shouldn't belong to a child. A holiday of freedom. A family just wanting peace. And yet all it took was one prejudiced glance, one quiet remark, one careless phone call, for everything to begin to crack. And in the distance, the low growl of a police engine grew louder, an unforgiving answer to the fear that had just been set in motion. The engine rumbled from the park's entrance like a sharp tear through the calm air. It wasn't the sound of a family arriving for a picnic, nor the ringing of children's bikes. It was a sound Naomi knew too well, the slow, gravelly hum of a patrol car. The blue and white Atlanta PD cruiser rolled into the parking area without its siren, but the faint amber lights flickered like a warning. It didn't speed in. It didn't brake hard. It crept, deliberate, calculated, as if scanning, selecting, zeroing in. And Naomi knew she was the one it was zeroing in on. Zion was mid-run when the ball rolled off his foot, his body freezing in place. "Mom, why are they coming here?" His voice was small, innocent, yet trembling. A 9-year-old shouldn't know fear at the sound of a police car, but in this country, children like Zion often learn that lesson far too early. Naomi put on a comforting smile, the kind only mothers who have survived 1,000 silent heart attacks know how to make. "It's okay, baby. You're safe close to me." But sweat was already gathering in her palms. Malik stood beside her, not running anymore, not drawing anymore, eyes locked on the cruiser inching closer. He didn't need an explanation. He understood exactly what was coming. Malik was old enough to know that black peace in public is always more fragile than anyone else's. Inside the car, 2 officers scanned the park as if they were inventorying potential suspects. But when their eyes landed on Naomi, the cruiser slowed noticeably. She recognized that feeling instantly. They weren't searching for a suspect. They were searching for a reason. Naomi rose from the bench, gently pulling Zion close while placing her other hand on Malik's shoulder, not out of fear, out of readiness. A reflex carved into bone and memory. A reflex no mother ever wants to teach her children, yet must. The atmosphere in the park shifted. Joggers slowed. A few people turned their heads toward the 3 of them. Not everyone understood what was happening, but they all felt the invisible tension tightening around the small patch of grass where Naomi stood. When the police car finally stopped, its tires crunching softly over gravel, Zion squeezed his mother's hand. Malik swallowed hard, his face stiffening. Naomi could hear her own heartbeat, not from fear, but because she knew her children were learning another brutal truth. That one prejudiced phone call, one moment of someone deciding you don't belong, can rip your entire sky away. One officer opened his door, stepping out as his heavy gear clattered against itself. "Good afternoon," he said, though his voice was cold as metal. He looked at Naomi as if he already knew what he wanted to find. Juneteenth, supposedly a day of freedom. But as the officers began walking toward them, Naomi understood. For black people, freedom is always conditional, always temporary. And today, that temporary moment had just ended. The officer approached with a slow, heavy stride, authoritative, deliberate, as if he had stepped straight out of a handbook written to manufacture fear. His head was shaved close, dark sunglasses pushed onto his forehead, and his voice was calibrated to sound polite while hiding a thin blade inside every syllable. "Ma'am," he began, "we received a call about suspicious activity in this area. I'll need to see some ID." Naomi drew Malik and Zion closer. She stood tall, her expression steady, though inside her chest something painful pulsed and grew. How many times in her life had she forced herself to swallow the sting of prejudice? How many times had she bitten down tongue to avoid escalating a situation where people like her were never allowed to be the ones who made a mistake? Her voice was even, unwavering. "We're just playing in the park. These are my sons." The second officer, younger, but with that blank, conditioned stare of someone accustomed to doubting faces like hers, stepped forward. "We still have to verify. There was a report of a possible child abduction. If you cooperate, this will go quickly." Zion's small hand brushed her fingers. Malik, taller, pressed against Naomi's side like a thin, determined wall. His eyes darkened, anger and fear swirling together, emotions no child should ever have to know so deeply. Naomi pressed her lips together. "They are my sons. No one has been abducted." "Then you won't mind if we ask them a few questions?" the older officer said slowly, like he was setting a familiar trap and waiting for her to step into it. He bent down, not with kindness, but with the posture of a man addressing a suspect rather than a child. "You," he said to Malik, "what's your mother's full name?" Malik froze. He knew the question wasn't born from concern. He knew they were searching for a reason, any reason, to take his mother away. But he answered, clear and steady, "Her name is Naomi Williams." He wanted to say more, that she was a wonderful mother, that she worked to protect this country, that she was the light of his and Zion's world. But the words jammed in his throat. The officer had already shifted to Zion, speaking in a syrupy, fake-sweet voice that sent a shiver of disgust down Naomi's spine. "And you? Do you know what your mom's name is?" Zion clung to Naomi's leg. "Mama's name is Naomi," he whispered. "So she's really your mother, huh?" The younger officer tilted his head, leaning hard on the words "your mother" as if they were meant to bruise. Naomi tightened her grip on her sons, her breath growing heavier. These questions weren't meant to clarify anything. They were crafted to plant doubt, to twist an innocent family into something suspicious, something controllable. And the worst part, they were doing it right in front of two children who were learning how the world viewed them. "Ma'am," the older officer continued, "I need to see your ID, driver's license, and vehicle registration." Naomi's voice remained astonishingly calm. "I'll provide my ID, but I want to know why my family is being singled out." The younger officer folded his arms, lowering his face just enough to hide the thin, mocking smile tugging at his lips. "We're simply responding to a report from a concerned citizen." A concerned citizen. Naomi knew exactly who that citizen was. The white woman at the picnic table was still staring at them, her face stretched tight in a self-righteous expression that said, "I did the right thing." Her husband had turned away, looking quietly ashamed, though not enough to stop her. Naomi inhaled deeply. "Fine. My ID is in my bag. I'm going to reach for it now." Slowly, the older officer warned, his hand drifting dangerously close to his gun. "No sudden movements?" Zion recoiled at the sight, fear washing over him. Malik bit his lip hard enough for it to bleed. For a simple wallet, Naomi had to prove she wasn't a threat, though she was the only person here who truly knew what she had sacrificed to protect this country. She opened her bag carefully. A second later, the officer's rough hand snapped around her wrist, gritty, cold, soaked with humiliation. In that instant, Naomi understood. They hadn't come to ask questions. They had come to assert power, and they had chosen the wrong woman. When the officer's hand suddenly clamped around Naomi's wrist, time collapsed into a single tiny point, a point filled with fear, humiliation, and the ancestral insult carried in the blood of people like her for generations. His grip was so tight that Naomi heard Zion inhale sharply behind her, as if he could feel that pain traveling straight through his own small body. Malik froze, his eyes widening until the whites showed stark against his skin. The 13-year-old who always tried to look strong for his little brother now looked like a child lost in a nightmare. The very nightmare black kids are taught from the time they're young. Never let the police see you're scared, but never let them think you're challenging them either. Naomi felt her wrist twist, not enough to bruise, but enough to send a message. You're not someone who gets to speak. She didn't scream. She didn't yank away. She didn't tremble. But inside her chest, her heart tightened in a way no FBI shootout had ever made her feel. "Don't move," the officer growled, as if Naomi had done something wrong simply by trying to retrieve the ID he himself had asked for. "I told you I was getting my ID," Naomi said, her words like molten metal sliding between her teeth. "You have no right to put your hands on me." The younger officer behind her crossed his arms, wearing the indifferent expression of someone who had long used authority to wash away accountability. "You're being uncooperative. We're allowed to intervene when we suspect a kidnapping." Zion stepped back half a step, nearly disappearing behind his mother's leg. "Mom," he whispered, his voice thin as a thread about to snap. Naomi turned her head just slightly, enough to soothe him. "It's okay, baby. I'm right here." But her eyes never left the officer gripping her wrist. She knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't about ID. This wasn't about public safety. This was domination, a ritual meant to place her beneath them, to diminish her in front of the very children she had sworn to protect with her life. "Let go of my mom!" Malik's voice erupted without warning, cracking, trembling, overflowing with fear and fury. Naomi had never heard that sound come from her son. It carried a bravery no child should ever be forced to use. "Keep the kid back," the younger officer said calmly, chillingly. "And you, don't make this worse." Worse. They always used lines like that to scare black people into bowing their heads. Naomi lifted her chin, locking eyes with the man holding her. In his gaze, she saw no caution, no hesitation, only the smug contempt of someone who believed he had the unquestioned right to define truth. And beneath that contempt, Naomi saw something else. He had no idea who she was. No idea she'd stared down human traffickers with guns raised to her face. No idea she'd dismantled criminal networks powerful enough to shake entire federal task forces. No idea his hand was gripping the wrist of a federal agent trained to survive on skill, not fear. But worst of all, he had no idea he was humiliating a mother in front of her two young sons. "Let me go," Naomi said again, each word sharp, precise, a blade. "I am not resisting. You are assaulting me." "Be quiet," he snapped, squeezing harder. And in that moment when his rough hand dared press humiliation into her skin, something inside Naomi shifted. Not aggression, not anger, but the deeply buried instinct she kept hidden when out of uniform, the combat reflex of a federal agent. Not to attack, not to provoke, but to protect. To protect herself. But more importantly, to protect her children. Naomi slid her left foot back, rotated her hips, and twisted her wrist at the exact angle she had practiced hundreds of times until it became reflex. The officer didn't see it coming, only felt his grip break, his hand forced open, his control severed. He stumbled back a step, stunned, humiliated. I just escaped an unlawful hold," Naomi cut him off, lightning sharp. "And let me be clear. None of you will put your hands on my children or me again." The younger officer's hand twitched toward his gun belt. Malik inhaled sharply. Zion began to cry silently, his small shoulders shaking. Naomi stepped fully in front of them, a shield against the storm. Her stance shifted, lower, grounded, balanced. A stance only those trained for combat would recognize. People around them had begun turning. Some phones were already raised. The older officer clenched his jaw so tight that a muscle in his cheek jumped. He stared at Naomi like she had wounded his professional pride. But he didn't understand. What he had wounded was far greater. A mother, a woman, a human being. Naomi didn't say another word. She didn't need to. Her eyes said everything. Today, you picked the wrong one. The moment the officer's grip broke off Naomi's wrist, the air in the park seemed to shatter. All the warm sounds of a Juneteenth afternoon, children running, leaves rustling, even the thump of a ball on grass, faded into something distant, as if being sucked into another world. Only three things remained: the frantic breathing of her two sons, the scrape of police boots on the ground, and the pounding of Naomi's heart, reminding her she was still alive and still had to protect. The younger officer reacted first. He yanked his taser from its holster with a speed that made Malik flinch and Zion release a small, broken sob. Naomi instantly stepped back half a pace, lowering her body, her arms spreading just enough to pull both boys behind her. But to the children, she was no longer just mom. She was becoming something else, the only shield between them and the nightmare descending on them. "Don't move!" the younger officer shouted, taser aimed directly at Naomi's chest. "She attacked me!" The older officer, the one whose grip she had escaped, roared, red-faced with humiliation and rage. Losing control of a black woman in front of witnesses had wounded him in a place he would never admit. Naomi didn't move. She knew their distance. She knew the taser's range. She knew their stance, their angles, and their reaction times. Knowledge she never wanted to use in front of her children. But today, she had no choice. "Mom?" Zion trembled behind her. "What are they going to do to you?" Naomi squeezed his hand gently, her voice low but steady. "It's okay, baby. I'm here." But the words didn't soothe the ache in her chest, the ache of knowing her children were witnessing something she had tried to shield them from all her life, how easily their skin could turn playtime into danger. The older officer stood upright, his face burning with anger and shame. "Who the hell do you think you are?" he barked. "You think you can put your hands on a cop and get away with it?" "You put your hands on me first," Naomi replied, sharp, controlled, and infuriatingly calm. "That doesn't matter," he yelled. "You resisted." What Naomi heard was not resisted. What she heard was, "We can twist the truth however we want. If you survive this, consider yourself lucky. If you don't, who will believe you?" Malik pressed against her back, voice cracking. "Mom, what are they going to do to us?" The question pierced her heart like an arrow. Without another warning, the younger officer lunged forward, the taser aimed straight at Naomi with terrifying speed. He might have been trained, but Naomi had been forged in real combat, where the smallest mistake could cost an innocent life. In a single heartbeat, Naomi pivoted, moving Malik and Zion behind her. She swept her left arm across the officer's wrist, redirecting the taser upward. Electricity cracked through the air instead of into her body. Her motion was fluid, precise, so controlled that several bystanders gasped. She didn't use force. She used skill. She twisted the officer's wrist, breaking his stance. With her right hand, she pushed his other arm down and forward, sending him to the ground with the efficiency of someone who had drilled this move thousands of times. She didn't injure him. She only neutralized him, because her sons were watching. "Stop!" the older officer shouted, pulling out his own taser. Zion screamed, "No, don't hurt my mom!" Naomi's eyes flicked back for only a second, and nearly broke. Zion's face was soaked in tears. Malik was frozen, trembling, trying to hold back his cries by biting his already bleeding lip. No child should see this. No human should. But the older officer didn't see the children. He didn't see fear. He didn't see humanity. He only saw a black woman restraining his partner, something he found intolerable. He charged so fast that some people in the park screamed, "Stop! She's protecting her kids!" But he didn't see, didn't hear, didn't understand. Power had blinded him. As he lunged, Naomi sprang out of her hold, twisting left. She grabbed his wrist, pulled it downward, using his own momentum to flip him forward. He stumbled, losing balance, crashing to his knees. Now both officers were on the ground, breathless, furious, but their eyes wide with disbelief. Not because Naomi had overpowered them, but because she dared to. Phones were rising. Joggers had stopped. A couple was recording. A man shouted, "She didn't do anything! They attacked her first!" But Naomi knew a painful truth. Public outrage did not equal safety. Video did not always save black lives. She had seen too much to believe otherwise. The younger officer staggered to his feet, panting, no longer looking like an officer enforcing the law, but a man humiliated in public and hungry for revenge. Malik saw it first. "Mom!" he cried. "He's—" But Naomi already knew. She straightened, hands ready, body steady as a steel beam. "I'm warning you," Naomi said, her voice colder than metal. "Do not touch me, and do not, ever, touch my children." "Who the hell do you think you are?" The older officer snarled again, though his voice shook. Naomi met his eyes, not as someone defending herself, but as someone who knew exactly where she stood in this world. "I'm the mother of 2 children crying because of you," she said, not loud, but ringing like a bell of steel. "And that is more than enough for you to stop." A long silence fell. Then a voice rose from the crowd. "Turn around! Get everything! They're trying to attack a mother!" The officers stepped back, not because they understood the truth, not because they felt remorse, but because they knew this wasn't over. They just needed backup, and Naomi knew it too. The real storm was only beginning. The sirens echoed from a distance, at first just a faint sound woven into the breeze sweeping through the trees. But then they grew louder, clearer, like a cruel reminder that power never travels alone. Another patrol car tore into the park, its tires grinding so hard against the pavement that nearby children scattered in fear. Red and blue lights spun wildly, reflecting across Malik and Zion's faces. Faces drained of color by a fear no family should ever experience on a simple day in the park. Naomi knew this was coming. She had seen it in the eyes of the 2 officers before they backed off, the look of men who refused to lose to a black woman, who refused to lose while being recorded, who refused to lose face to someone they believed shouldn't matter. The car stopped abruptly. 2 more officers stepped out, a man and a woman, both with hands resting on their weapon belts as if ready to escalate from checking to subduing. "She assaulted us!" the younger officer shouted, his voice sharp with bitterness and spite. "Assaulted!" a bystander shot back. "We saw you shove her first." But truth had never mattered more than the words of someone wearing a badge. Naomi kept her children close, running a calming hand over Zion's back, even as her own hands trembled. It wasn't fear shaking her. It was the brutal helplessness of knowing that no matter how strong she was, her skin could still be used as a weapon against her. One of the new officers looked Naomi up and down, eyes narrowing as if she were a dangerous suspect. "You. Stay exactly where you are. Do not move." "She didn't do anything wrong," a black woman in the crowd shouted. "We saw everything." And from a distance, the same white woman, the one who had called 911, stood with her arms crossed, wearing the expression of someone convinced that the chaos unfolding was proof of her good instincts. Naomi took a breath and kept her voice steady. "I was protecting my children. These 2 officers assaulted me when I was simply retrieving my identification." "We received a report of possible child abduction," the female officer said, her tone cold and clinical. "We have the authority to detain you for further investigation." "Detain?" Malik was nearly broken. "That's my mom. Why would you say she kidnapped us?" His voice cracked, and several people in the crowd looked away, unable to bear the sight of a child shattered like that. The female officer remained unmoved. "We need to verify properly. The 3 of you will come with us." "No." Naomi's voice cut through the air, soft, but so firm that even the newly arrived officers faltered. Her voice wasn't loud. It was quiet, but it held the strength of every wound she had ever endured. "I am not leaving with you. Not while my children are terrified because of your actions. Not when you're using a biased, baseless call to treat me like a criminal." The younger officer, the one still hurting from being disarmed, jabbed a finger toward her face. "She's dangerous. She knows combat. "I know self-defense," Naomi interrupted, "and I was forced to use it because you touched me illegally." A collective "Oh!" rippled through the crowd. But the older officer stepped forward, desperate to regain control. "Who the hell do you think you are? You think you can stand here and challenge the police in a public park?" Naomi looked him dead in the eyes, and for a moment, all sound disappeared. It was just a mother staring down a man who was threatening her children. Then, slowly, deliberately, not fast, not sudden, but unmistakably, Naomi reached behind her back and pulled out something none of the officers expected. A metal badge glinting under the evening sun. "Special Agent, Dr. Naomi Williams, FBI." Her voice didn't waver, soft yet sharp enough to cut steel. "And now you are going to listen to me." The entire park erupted in murmurs. The two newly arrived officers froze. The officer whose wrist she had twisted stared, mouth open. The white woman at the picnic table blanched, her confidence evaporating. Malik stared at his mother, and for the first time during the nightmare, a flicker of pride lit his eyes. Zion clung to her hand, as if she had just transformed into a superhero. But Naomi didn't smile, because she knew a painful truth, even as a federal agent. That day they had still decided she was a criminal, and that truth only made the storm coming next even more terrifying. Silence fell across the park after Naomi raised her badge, but it wasn't the silence of respect. It was the charged, brittle silence of a rope pulled to its final thread, waiting for the moment it snaps. The two newly arrived officers exchanged uneasy glances, their eyes flicking from Naomi to the badge, then to the crowd recording everything. They hadn't expected this. None of them had imagined that the woman they were ready to drag away, ready to accuse, ready to brutalize, was a federal agent. But Naomi stood still. Not proud, not performative. Just a mother fighting to keep her fury from swallowing the men who had terrified her children. "You want to continue this?" Naomi asked, her voice unnervingly calm sharpened to a blade beneath the surface. A twisted smirk pulled at the face of the officer who had grabbed her earlier. He staggered to his feet, humiliation burning in every muscle. "Federal agent or not," he growled, "you're still going to answer for assaulting an officer." Naomi stared straight into him. "I defended myself. You know that, and so do the dozens of cameras recording right now." The crowd roared in agreement, several phones lifting even higher, an unspoken declaration. We saw everything. Zion clutched the back of Naomi's shirt, his entire body still trembling. Malik glared at the officer, his eyes red with a mix of fear and rage no child should ever have to feel. The second officer, the one who had initially seemed calmer, stepped forward trying to salvage the situation. We didn't know you were an agent. We were just responding to a report and following protocol." "What protocol is that?" Naomi cut in. "The protocol where you corner a black mother? The protocol where you interrogate my children like criminals? The protocol where you invent excuses to search me in front of my sons?" No answer. No one dared. Naomi continued, her voice low yet striking the air like hammer blows. "Or are you following the protocol this country has allowed for years, where my skin is the only excuse you need to treat me as a threat?" Several people in the crowd murmured their agreement. A middle-aged man called out, "She's right. This is straight-up racism." And then the third patrol car arrived. The crowd rippled with alarm. Malik stumbled back a step, eyes wide. Zion nearly collapsed to the ground, burying his face behind Naomi's leg. Naomi placed a protective hand on her children's heads, her gaze locked on the vehicle that had just screeched to a stop. A powerful voice rang out when the door opened. "What's going on here?" Lieutenant Harris. Naomi recognized him instantly. She'd seen him in a few interagency meetings. He carried a particular kind of authority, not from his rank, but from his belief in the absolute power he wielded. Harris approached, scanning the two humiliated officers before turning to her, squinting. "Agent Williams," he said, sounding both surprised and irritated. Naomi met his gaze, sharp as a blade. "Lieutenant, word is you had an altercation with my officers." "Altercation?" Naomi let out a laugh, one with no hint of humor. "One grabbed me while I complied. Two interrogated my children like suspects. A white woman's baseless fear dragged police into harassing a black family eating ice cream in a park." Harris looked around, noticing the dozens of phones aimed at him, yet his expression didn't shift. A cold smile crept over his lips, as if everything Naomi said meant nothing to him. "Williams," he said slowly, "this is not an FBI briefing. We run this area, and when there's a report of suspicious behavior, we follow up, like it or not." "And that report came from whom?" Naomi asked. "A woman who couldn't accept a black family existing next to her?" Harris's face darkened. A tense silence stretched thin. Naomi stepped forward half a pace. "You know I did nothing wrong, and you know even better. Your officers would never treat a blonde white mother and her kids like this." Harris tightened his jaw, but his eyes remained cold steel. "I'm going to need documentation to verify the identity of the children." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Malik choked on his breath, as if the words had grabbed him by the throat. Zion gripped Naomi so tightly his tiny fingers shook. Naomi stood still for a moment. Then she knelt, pulling both boys close. The pain that tore through her chest wasn't fear. It was the cruelty of that question. The audacity of a world that dared make children wonder whether their mother's love was valid in the eyes of these men. When she rose, her face had changed. No softness, no restraint, only fire. "You just crossed a line, Harris." The crowd held its breath. "You want proof these are my children?" Naomi gestured to Malik and Zion. "Then look them in the eyes and ask yourself why you think a black mother can't be the biological parent of her own kids." Harris said nothing, but in his silence was guilt, exposed and raw, and Naomi recognized it. She stepped closer, her voice dropping into something dangerously calm. "Harris, today you didn't just insult me. You let this entire city see exactly how rotten the system you protect really is." Around them, phones rose even higher. Live streams rolled, every eye locked onto the woman standing at the center of the storm like an iron pillar. Naomi wrapped her arms around her sons. The entire park went quiet enough to hear her say, "No one has the right to make my children feel like they don't belong here." Harris had lost, and he knew it. The radio on Harris's shoulder cracked sharply, a dry pop cutting through the tense air. A dispatcher's voice relayed something about requests for support, but he didn't answer. He just stood there, face carved from stone, staring at Naomi as if she were the greatest threat he had ever faced in his career. Not because she was dangerous, but because she was right. Right in a way that couldn't be denied. Right in a way that made every lie the system relied on tremble right there, in that quiet park. Naomi felt that shift. She saw the hesitation flicker in Harris's eyes, the twitch of his hand when he noticed dozens of phones pointed directly at him. One wrong step, and he would become the headline of the night. But the thing that hurt Naomi most was not his authority. It was Malik, her oldest, standing frozen like a statue, face pale, eyes wide, trying to understand why the world wanted to take away the mother he adored. 12 years old and already learning a lesson far too brutal for a child's heart. And Zion, only 8, clung to her leg as though letting go for even 1 second might make his mother disappear forever. Naomi knew exactly what they were feeling, the kind of fear black children in America learn far too early. Harris stepped forward, trying to reclaim control. "Williams, I'm asking you to cooperate. We can resolve this calmly if you provide the documents and let us—" "I'm not giving you anything else." Naomi's voice was slow, precise. "You will not touch my children again." Harris narrowed his eyes. "You're obstructing an investigation." "An investigation?" Naomi shot back. "Or an attempt to fabricate a justification for your mistake? I know that tactic. I've written case reports on people who have used it for 10 years. A ripple of anger surged through the crowd. A young man shouted, "She's protecting her kids! They're terrified, and you're still demanding more documents?" A middle-aged woman holding her daughter's hand raised her phone to live stream. "No one should have to go through this. No one." Naomi's expression softened just a little at the sound of their support. But then the emotional line inside her shattered when Malik suddenly burst into tears. "Mom didn't do anything wrong," he choked. "So why do they treat you like you're bad?" The question stabbed straight through her heart. She dropped to her knees instantly, pulling Malik and Zion into her arms. In that moment, in front of everyone, Naomi was no longer a federal agent, not the woman who had just disarmed 2 trained officers. She was a mother watching her children learn the most painful lesson of all. Black means dangerous. Black means suspicious. Black means you're never innocent unless proven otherwise. Naomi kissed their hair, her voice trembling yet unwavering. "You did nothing wrong. Neither did I. What's wrong is how they see us. Not you, not me." Zion sobbed harder. "I don't want them to take you away." The park fell silent, as if the little boy's words had pierced straight through the thick armor of society, revealing a horrifying truth. Police presence does not mean safety for every child. Some children feel threatened by the very people meant to protect them. For a flicker of a moment, Harris's face wavered. He was not entirely without emotion, but he was a product of a system, and that system did not tolerate softness. "If you refuse to cooperate," Harris said, voice dropping, "we will have to take you in." Before he could finish, a shout erupted from the crowd. "Don't touch them!" A large man stepped forward, fury etched across his face. "I saw everything. She was assaulted first. Those officers twisted the story on the spot." Voices joined him. "I recorded the whole thing. We'll testify. You're not taking her anywhere." Like a rising wave, the crowd shifted forward, not aggressive, but firm. A human wall forms around Naomi and her children. Harris realized the situation had changed. Naomi rose, keeping her sons close. "So what are you going to do now, Harris?" Her voice was quiet, but heavy as stone. "Arrest a federal agent in front of dozens of witnesses and live cameras?" Harris didn't answer. He couldn't. Naomi stepped closer, eyes burning with a mix of pain and defiance. "You want to know the scariest part of today?" she asked. "It's not you approaching me. Not the violence. Not the accusations." She tapped her chest. "The scariest part is that my children are used to this." Malik shut his eyes tight, not wanting to hear, yet hearing everything. Zion squeezed her hand until his small fingers trembled. Naomi continued. "They're 8 and 12, and they already know what racism looks like. They already know how to stand still when police approach. They already know to fear sirens. And you think that's normal?" Harris swallowed hard. There was no answer he could give that would hide the truth unfolding in front of him. Naomi shook her head, slowly, decisively. Her voice sliced through the silence. "No. Today you didn't just confront me. Today you showed this entire city what black families endure every single day." Then, from somewhere on the right side of the crowd, a single pair of hands began to clap. Another joined, then another, and soon, the entire park, dozens of people, was applauding. Not out of celebration, out of solidarity, out of unity, out of refusal to look away. Harris watched the scene unfold and understood. Finally, he had lost the moment Naomi lifted her badge. Naomi bent down and wrapped her arms around her children once more. But this time, in that embrace, there was not only fear, there was pride. There was protection. There was a silent promise forged in steel. No one, not even those with power in their hands, would ever make her children bow because of their skin. Harris's gaze finally slipped away from Naomi, as though he no longer had the courage to look directly at the woman his authority had failed to break. But the silence between them wasn't the silence of resolution. It was the suffocating quiet of a storm that had been stopped, temporarily, only to retreat and gather its strength again. Naomi felt it the moment Harris placed his hand on his radio. He tilted his head, listening to a new dispatch. A flicker crossed his face, small, but enough for Naomi to understand. This wasn't over. Malik clutched her hand tighter. "Mom, can we go home now?" The question sliced her heart open all over again. She looked at his small, tear-streaked face. No child should feel trapped in a battleground in the middle of a park. Yet here they were, surrounded by stares, by threats, by prejudice. Naomi knelt and placed a hand on Malik's shoulder. "We will, baby, I promise. But first—" She lifted her head, eyes sharpening into steel. "I need to make sure they don't try anything else." Harris stepped forward, not aggressively this time, but like a man trying to steady himself before his authority slipped completely out of his grasp. "Williams," he said, "I just received a more complete report. There's a possibility—" "No," Naomi cut in, her voice stripped of the softness she once offered him. "You have no possibility except to admit the truth. And accept responsibility. Let me finish—" "No," she said again, firmer. "You finish listening." Naomi had never been a woman who sought confrontation. But today, her children's pain had pushed her past every boundary. "You no longer have the authority to question me," she raised her badge. "You no longer have the right to lay a hand on my children. You no longer have the power to twist the truth to protect your officers." Harris narrowed his eyes, but she could see it. He was losing control. A voice called out from behind the crowd. "Harris, that's enough." Everyone turned. A tall, sharply dressed man stepped forward, carrying the natural weight of command. Whispers rippled through the onlookers. "That's Deputy Chief Bennett." Bennett walked straight to Harris, not looking at Naomi at first. "The report I received doesn't match what you just told me." Harris stiffened. "Sir, the situation was exaggerated. Naomi stepped forward. "Me? I what? Did I protect my children when I was assaulted? Showed my credentials when I was being falsely accused?" Bennett lifted a hand, signaling her to wait. For the first time all afternoon, Naomi paused. "Agent Williams," Bennett said, turning to her, "I'd like to hear your version." The crowd erupted in support. "We have video!" "We saw everything." "They jumped her first." Harris went pale. Bennett looked at him with a stare sharp enough to cut through every lie. "I've already been sent videos," Bennett said slowly, "from 4 different angles." The 2 officers who attacked Naomi stumbled backward, their faces drained of color. They knew the truth was no longer bendable, no longer hideable. "Williams," Bennett continued, "it's clear you were approached improperly, questioned without cause, and treated far outside the limits of lawful conduct." Naomi felt something loosen in her chest, only slightly, because even though Bennett was siding with her, the wound inflicted on her sons couldn't be undone so easily. Malik and Zion were still trembling. They didn't need legal definitions to understand what had happened. Their hearts already knew the world had hurt them. "We will conduct a full investigation. These officers—" Harris tried to interrupt. "Sir, if there are other witnesses—" "Enough," Bennett said, not loud but laced with lethal authority. "You've done enough." Small cheers rose from the crowd. Naomi wanted to smile, but she couldn't. The pain was too deep. But for the first time that endless afternoon, she saw a sliver of light cutting through the injustice. And then, just as she had feared, a sleek black SUV rolled into the park. No siren, no flashing lights, but its presence weighed on the air. Naomi recognized it instantly. Internal affairs. 3 individuals stepped out, wearing suits and small ID badges. They didn't look at the crowd. They didn't look at Bennett. They looked only at Naomi. "We need to speak privately with Special Agent Williams," one of them said. Zion tightened his grip on her shirt. Malik stepped in front of his brother, but his red, frightened eyes gave him away. Naomi pulled her boys close with one arm. "I'm not going anywhere without my lawyer. This is an official request." "An official request comes with paperwork," Naomi replied, each word sharp as glass. "And it goes through the proper channels. Right now I'm off duty and I'm protecting my children from negligence." One of the internal affairs agents glanced at Harris as if silently asking, "What chaos have you unleashed?" Then he turned back to Naomi, his expression shifting, subtle but genuine, realizing this situation had spiraled far beyond policy. "We can return at another time," he said. The crowd exhaled in relief. Naomi neither thanked him nor nodded. She simply watched as they retreated to the SUV and drove off, leaving a strange, uneasy quiet behind them. At last, Bennett spoke. "Williams, would you like us to escort you and the children home?" Naomi looked at her sons, letting them answer with their eyes. Zion shook his head, tears falling. "I just want to leave with you." Naomi knelt, held him tight, then stood. She faced Bennett. "I don't need an escort, I need something else." "What's that?" "Justice." Bennett held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "You'll have it." Naomi took her sons by the hand and walked through the crowd. But this time, the park parted for them, people stepping aside, creating a path of protection. Every face she passed carried respect, sorrow, and a burning anger on her behalf. An older woman pressed a hand to her heart and whispered, "Thank you for fighting." Naomi didn't look back. She didn't want her children to see the tears spilling from her eyes. She only tightened her grip on their hands, because she knew, this afternoon, this park had stolen a piece of her children's innocence, and the battle ahead had only just begun. Naomi drove away from the park with both hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned pale. The road ahead blurred, not because she couldn't see it, but because Zion's tears were soaking into her shirt, warm and trembling, as if his tiny heart was curling in on itself to escape a world far too big, far too cruel. Malik sat in the back seat, not crying. But his silence hurt more than sobs ever could. He stared out the window, eyes red, fighting to swallow something no 12-year-old should ever have to carry. "You okay, Malik?" Naomi asked softly, afraid her own voice might crack. He didn't answer at first. His reflection in the window was full of hurt. Finally, he whispered, "Do they hate us that much, Mom?" The question squeezed Naomi's chest like a vice. She had faced hundreds of criminals, endured threats from dangerous people, but none of them had ever wounded her like that one question. "Not everyone," she said, trying to steady her voice. "But some people, they only see our skin, not who we are." Zion lifted his head, his eyes drowning in tears. "So, if my skin was different, they wouldn't hurt you?" Naomi's breath caught. She signaled and pulled the car over, unable to keep driving. Her children were learning a lesson every black mother tries to spare her kids from, but society forces them to learn anyway. She unbuckled her seatbelt and turned to face them. "Listen to me," she said, taking each of their hands. "There is nothing wrong with your skin, nothing wrong with being black. What's wrong is the way some people treat us." Malik lowered his head. "But I saw how they looked at you, like you were a criminal." You're the best person I know, and they still didn't believe you." Naomi bit her lip until she tasted blood. "That's why I fight. Not so they'll believe me, but so they won't dare do this to anyone else." Zion began crying again. Malik placed a hand on his brother's shoulder, trying to be strong even though he was trembling too. Naomi reached back and pulled both of them into her arms. The three of them held each other in the parked SUV, the dying light of evening casting tired gold across the windows. Those fading sunbeams felt like a thin layer of hope. But beneath them lay the darkness of the truth they had just lived through. When they got home, Naomi locked the door immediately. She pulled the curtains shut, turned on the security system. Home usually helped her breathe, but today it felt like a fortress, a place she had to defend, not from criminals, but from the people paid to protect them. Zion ran straight to his room and shut the door. Malik didn't move. He stood at the entryway, staring at the lock like it wasn't strong enough to keep danger away. "Mom," he whispered, barely audible. "What if they come here?" Naomi knelt so they were eye level. She cupped his cheek. "I will protect you, both of you, no matter what." Malik still didn't look up. "But today, you had to protect us from the police. If the police are dangerous, who's safe, Mom?" Naomi squeezed his hand, trying to give him whatever warmth and strength she had left. "There are good officers, Malik, but there are others." She hesitated, then sighed. "Others who abuse their power. And today we met those ones." Naomi knew it wasn't enough. Words couldn't patch the hole that today had torn in her children's hearts. After calming Zion with a lullaby she hadn't used since they were little, Naomi returned to the living room. The dim light revealed the fatigue, the anger, and the fierce resolve etched into her face. She opened her laptop, and she began writing the report. Every moment, every question, every look, every violation she had been forced to resist. Her fingers hit the keys so hard they made sharp, echoing taps. When she reached the part where the officer grabbed her wrist in front of her children, Naomi froze. She closed her eyes, took a breath, then typed, her words cutting like steel. "They did not only put their hands on me, they put their hands on my children's safety. And in that moment, I was no longer an agent. I was a mother pushed to the edge." She stopped when she heard Malik's footsteps. He approached slowly, like he feared breaking the heavy quiet. "Mom," he said, holding his sketchbook. I made something." He handed her a drawing. Naomi was standing in the park, arms spread wide like a shield, protecting her sons. Behind her, police lights blazed openly, yet her figure remained tall, unbroken. A pillar. Naomi burst into tears the moment she saw it. "You're our superhero," Malik whispered. "But today I was scared they were going to take you." Naomi pulled him into a trembling hug. "No one is taking me from you. No one." Outside, a car rolled slowly down their street. Naomi stiffened, clutching Malik closer. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "We have to be stronger than ever." Malik nodded, eyes older than they should ever be. "Then you have to keep fighting. Zion and I will stand behind you." Naomi looked at her 12-year-old son and saw what those officers at the park could not. A child, not a threat, learning how to survive a world without fairness. And for him, for Zion, for every black child who has to stand tall in a world built to make them small. Naomi knew. Her fight was only beginning. Naomi sat alone in her small home office, the soft yellow lamp casting shadows over scattered files strewn across the desk. The wall clock hovered near midnight, but time had lost meaning. The house was painfully quiet. The steady breathing of her children in the next room was the only thing keeping her grounded as a storm churned inside her. Every file on the desk felt like a fragment of a larger nightmare, a nightmare she once believed she was shielded from by the title federal agent. but today had stripped that illusion bare. Sometimes, for a black person, not even a badge was enough to protect them from suspicion, from hands ready to seize their wrist, from lies spoken as casually as breath. Her phone buzzed against the wood. Naomi startled, her hand trembling when she saw the caller ID. Sarah, her closest colleague at the FBI. She hesitated, then answered. Naomi. Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. Are you alone? The kids are asleep. Sarah exhaled, a weary sound that twisted Naomi's stomach. I called around internally. There's an emergency summons for you. They're collecting statements. Naomi, they're trying to spin this against you. Naomi closed her eyes. I know, she murmured. No, you don't. Sarah's voice sharpened with urgency. They're pulling old reports, tiny notes you made years ago. They're trying to create a narrative. Agent Williams is volatile, unstable. Naomi, they want to bury you. A blade of invisible pain slid into Naomi's chest. She had expected retaliation, but not an attack on her integrity, her career, the reputation she spent over a decade building. You need to be careful, Sarah continued. I heard rumors. Someone in command contacted the city police. They want to use today as evidence you're a threat. Naomi let out a dry, humorless laugh. A threat? Because I protected my children? Because I wouldn't let them put their hands on us? Naomi, Sarah whispered, voice trembling. I know you're strong, but this time, I'm scared for you. For the first time all day, Naomi felt her eyes sting, not from fear, from heartbreak, because she had to face the truth. The system she'd dedicated her life to was standing against her. They were building a narrative to tear her down. I'm not giving up, Naomi said, voice low but solid as iron. They won't break me, Sarah. I'll fight. After ending the call, Naomi looked around the room where she once crafted case files, decoded patterns, nurtured her belief in justice. Tonight, it was the war room where she would prepare a battle between truth and deception. She opened a new document on her laptop and began recounting everything that happened at the park. Not just through the mind of an agent, but through the heart of a mother. Her fingers flew, each memory, each contemptuous stare, each biased question, each shudder in her children's breath as they were treated like criminals. She typed, When his hand clamped around my wrist, I felt what countless black people have felt for generations, that in some eyes, my skin alone is reason enough to be seen as dangerous, no matter who I am, no matter what I've given. Tears splashed onto the keyboard. Naomi wasn't crying out of humiliation, not from fear. She cried for Zion, for Malik, for the way their small shoulders trembled when the officers closed in. For the moment, Malik had looked at her and asked, Is Mom going to be arrested? For the unbearable truth that her children didn't just fear losing her. They feared the police would take her away. Footsteps padded softly down the hall. Malik appeared in the doorway, his face marked by dried tears. Mom, you're still awake? Naomi closed the laptop gently. You can't sleep? He shook his head. I heard you crying. Naomi froze. She hadn't meant for him to hear, but Malik walked toward her, climbed into her lap, and wrapped his arms around her neck as if afraid she might vanish. Don't cry, he whispered. As long as you're here with us, that's enough. Naomi placed a trembling hand on his back. Baby, I'm not crying because I'm weak. I'm crying because I'm angry. Because they tried to make me feel unworthy of being your mother. Malik looked up, his dark eyes shimmering. They're wrong, Mom. They don't know you're the strongest person in the world. His words pulled her back from the edge. She kissed his forehead. Thank you, Malik. I promise. I won't let anyone hurt you or your brother again. After he finally fell asleep, Naomi returned to her desk. She kept writing, compiling evidence, preparing for the long war ahead. By the time the sky outside the window softened into early dawn, Naomi stopped typing. She stared at the pages, emails, statements, warrants, failings of the local police. Then she looked at the drawing Malik had given her the night before, her standing, shielding her sons like an unbreakable wall. She understood then. It wasn't just a drawing, it was a mission. That morning, when Naomi brought Malik and Zion to school, she lingered at the gate. The boys turned back, fear flickering in their eyes, as though stepping inside meant risking losing her. "I'll pick you up tonight," Naomi said, her voice a promise carved in stone. Zion hugged her tight. "Mom, you stay safe, okay?" "You just told us you protect us," Malik tried to joke, though his voice trembled. Naomi smiled, leaned down, and pressed her forehead to theirs. "We protect each other, all three of us. Deal?" Both boys whispered, "Deal." As Naomi drove away from the school, she gripped the steering wheel harder. Today would be the longest day of her life. She was about to face the lawyers, internal affairs, the FBI brass who wanted her silenced. But this time, she wasn't just Agent Naomi Williams. She was Malik and Zion's mother, and for them, she would fight to the very end. The sky hung heavy and gray, as though it wanted to drag the entire city down with it, when Naomi stepped into the building where her attorney was waiting. The glass doors closed behind her, shutting out the noise of the streets in an instant. Inside, the silence was so complete Naomi could hear her own heartbeat, each pulse like a knock from an uncertain future, waiting to see which direction it would break. Her lawyer, Alicia Grant, a black woman with a razor-sharp gaze and the steady presence of someone who'd fought too many battles in courtrooms steeped in bias, rose the moment Naomi entered. No hug, no handshake, just a direct stare, as if she were reading Naomi's soul before reading the case. "Sit, Naomi," Alicia said, her voice low and warm in that particular way, found only in people who've endured a lifetime of wars and never surrendered. Naomi sat, her palms still cold. Alicia set a thick stack of papers on the table, pages heavy as if they were evidence from a criminal case, except the person being scrutinized was the victim herself. "I watched all the videos," Alicia said, "all 4 angles, all the witness statements, and the internal police report they thought I couldn't get." Naomi's eyes snapped upward. "What did they write?" Alicia opened a page and slid it toward her. The words hit Naomi's eyes like poisoned arrows. Subject displayed non-compliant behavior. Exhibited aggressive tendencies. Potential threat due to combat skills. Naomi's fists clenched so tightly her knuckles whitened. "I was a mother defending her children," she whispered, "and they wrote me as a suspect." Alicia watched her carefully. "Naomi, they don't write reports to tell the truth. They write them to protect each other." Naomi let out a bitter laugh, sharp, exhausted, hollow. "I know, but reading it feels like someone tearing pieces of my dignity apart." Alicia nodded. "Exactly. And they're hoping it'll break you." Naomi lifted her head, eyes glassy but sharp. "I won't break." Alicia smiled, a thin, cutting smile. "Good. I'm not planning to let them rest easy either." She opened another folder. "This is our official response. I've prepared the complaint to the police department, the request for an independent investigation, and the claim for emotional damages to your children." Naomi stiffened. "Malik and Zion, they won't have to testify, will they?" Alicia shook her head. "No, but they are the most powerful witnesses to the truth, and their truth outweighs any rehearsed defense those officers can give." Pain rose inside Naomi, slow and deep. "I don't want my kids dragged into this." Alicia leaned forward. "Naomi, your kids were dragged into this. That's exactly why we fight." The words struck the softest part of Naomi's heart. She saw in her mind Zion clinging to her leg, his face twisted in fear as if the whole world was collapsing around him. Malik was trying to be strong, though he was only 12, old enough to understand, too young to ever forget. They lost something in that park, Naomi whispered. Their safety, their trust in adults, their trust in justice. Alicia placed her hand over Naomi's. And they will regain it when their mother stands up. Naomi bowed her head as tears fell freely. Alicia, what if I fail? Then we get up, Alicia answered instantly, her voice solid as stone. And if we fall again, we get up again. Naomi, this isn't just your case. This is the fight of every one of us, every black mother raising children in a society that sees them as threats. Every time we win, one black child sleeps more easily that night. Warmth rose in Naomi's chest, like a flame being lit. Thank you. Don't thank me, Alicia said, standing. Help me with the next step. What step? Alicia walked to the glass board and pinned 4 images, screenshots from the witness videos, right in the center, like strategic points on a battlefield. The moment the officer grabbed Naomi's wrist, the moment Zion screamed, his face twisted in terror, the moment Naomi raised her badge, the moment the crowd closed ranks around her. Alicia tapped the second image, Zion crying, his face tight with fear. This, she said, is our strongest piece of evidence. Naomi's voice dropped. That's my son. And they made him afraid in a way no child should ever be, Alicia replied. We're going to bring that truth to light. She turned back to Naomi. But you must be ready. There will be press, backlash, people who question your character without ever meeting you, and some will say cruel things designed to make anyone quit. Naomi inhaled slowly. Alicia, I've fought armed criminals. I've worked undercover in darkness. I've looked death in the eye. But nothing is more terrifying than my children watching me be treated like a criminal. Alicia nodded fiercely. Then turn that terror into strength. Naomi rose to her feet. She looked at the 4 pictures, at Zion's tear-filled eyes, at her own stance in the moment she lifted her badge, and she knew this wasn't a choice. It was destiny. All right, Naomi said, her voice hard as steel. I'm ready. Alicia smiled. Good, because tonight we hold a press conference. Naomi's eyes widened. A press conference? Yes, Alicia said calmly. Before they tell the story about you, we're going to tell it first. A shiver flashed down Naomi's spine. Not fear, but power. For the first time since yesterday, she wasn't reacting. She was taking control. Alicia gathered the files and added, Tonight, Naomi, you aren't just speaking for yourself. You're speaking for every child with skin like your son's, every mother with skin like yours, every person who's never been heard. Naomi looked toward the glass door. The muted gray sky reflected in her eyes, making them look deeper, sharper. From this moment on, she said, they'll have to face the truth. The air in the press room felt stretched thin, pulled tight with every breath people took. Microphones stacked atop one another. Bright lights beamed down so intensely they could scorch anyone unaccustomed to standing before the public. Naomi had never felt so small, not even when facing armed suspects or running through the dark halls of dangerous operations. Here, the threat wasn't weapons or shadows. It was public opinion, a force that could lift her up or destroy her reputation with a single headline. Beside her, attorney Alicia stood tall, unmoving, like a pillar carved into the ground. Alicia's calm presence was the anchor keeping Naomi steady amid the storm of cameras, whispers, and probing eyes. But Naomi could still hear her own heartbeat, fast, loud, almost frantic. Alicia leaned in and whispered, Breathe in, breathe out. Remember, the truth is on your side. Naomi nodded, though her hands trembled beneath her sleeves. She glanced toward the front row. Malik and Zion sat between Pastor Henry and two staff members. Malik sat upright, trying to look strong, though worry clouded his eyes. Zion clutched his stuffed deer, the one he had left behind in the park, because he had been too terrified to go back for it. Just one look at her son was enough to remind Naomi why she was here. Alicia stepped up to the podium first. "Thank you all for being here. Today we speak the truth. Not the edited version, not the twisted version, not the version polished by police language meant to shield wrongdoing. The truth, the only truth." The room fell still, as though holding its breath. "This is Naomi Reynolds," Alicia continued. "A federal agent with over 14 years of service, a spotless record, multiple commendations, no history of excessive force, a mother, a black woman who simply wanted to take her children to the park on a Sunday afternoon." Naomi stepped forward. The lights stung her eyes, but she knew she had to let the world see everything. "Thank you," she began. Her voice wavered slightly, but its honesty hushed the room. "I'm not here to fight the police. I'm here to fight injustice." Cameras pivoted toward her. Naomi lifted her chin. "That day, I was just playing with my children, two kids who wanted ice cream, who wanted to run in the grass. But someone looked at us differently, with suspicion, with contempt. They called me a suspect. They asked my children if they knew my name. They asked whether I had kidnapped my own sons." A few reporters lowered their eyes, guilt ghosting across their faces. Naomi gripped the microphone tighter. "The worst part wasn't the humiliation, not the grabbing, not the moment I had to defend myself. It was the look in my children's eyes, when they thought their mother was about to be taken away." Her voice cracked. Alicia placed a reassuring hand on her back. Naomi inhaled deeply. "I followed every rule, but they used their reports to paint me as aggressive. They used the system to cover their mistakes. They sent masked officers to my home at night, assaulted me in front of my neighbors, then claimed I tripped. All because I dared to say, 'You cannot put your hands on me.'" Gasps rippled across the room. Shock, anger, empathy. Alicia clicked a remote. A large screen lit up behind Naomi. Video clips played. Zion sobbed in the park. Malik stepped in front of his brother. An officer is twisting Naomi's wrist. The audio echoed through the press room, tearing open a wound that could no longer be hidden. A reporter shot to his feet. "Agent Reynolds, what do you want from this?" Naomi met his gaze, and everyone else's. "I want justice. Not just for me. Not just for my sons. For every person who has endured the same thing but had no video, no witnesses, no one to listen." A black woman in the back burst into tears. A man gripped his partner's hand, eyes shining. Naomi continued. "I want a world where a black mother can take her children to a park without fear of being interrogated. A world where my sons don't grow up terrified of being treated like criminals because of the color of their skin. A world where the truth isn't twisted to protect a system that has long been broken." The lights carved every line of pain and fire on Naomi's face. "I'm not here for sympathy," she said, each word slicing through the silence. "I'm here to open a door many have tried to break down for years. Today, I'm simply continuing what they began." Alicia touched her shoulder, the signal that her statement was done. But before Naomi could step back, Zion rose from his seat. His small voice pierced the heavy quiet. "My mom is a good person. She didn't do anything wrong." For a heartbeat, no one moved. No one breathed. Then applause erupted. Soft at first, then louder, then thunderous, filling the entire room. It wasn't applause for Naomi alone. It was for every mother ever dismissed. Every parent has ever feared. Every black family has ever been pushed into society's shadows. Naomi looked at Alicia, tears falling, but a smile breaking through. They had begun a battle, and for the first time, Naomi felt she wasn't fighting it alone. That afternoon, the sunlight poured over the park with the kind of warmth that only comes after a violent storm. It didn't just glow against the treetops. It felt like it was whispering to Naomi, "Today, you're safe." Weeks had passed since the press conference, yet Naomi's heartbeat still quickened as she pulled into the Mapleview Park lot. The iron gate came into view, the same one that led to the playground, a place that used to be a small paradise for her family before it suddenly became their darkest memory. Malik looked out the window, voice soft but hopeful. "Mom, we're really coming back here?" Naomi smiled and placed her hand over his. "Yes, baby. This is still our park. No one gets to take it from you." Zion didn't speak. He clutched his stuffed deer, the one he had sworn he'd never bring back. Yet today, he got in the car by himself. That alone made pride bloom inside Naomi's chest. They stepped out of the vehicle. A breeze drifted through the trees, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass, the shimmer of water from the pond, and the familiar sweetness of vanilla ice cream from the vendor near the gate. Everything was familiar, and yet strange, like returning to a hometown after years away. As they approached the playground, a few mothers sitting nearby turned their heads. Naomi froze for half a breath, bracing for the same judgmental stares she once knew so well. But this time, what met her was warmth. A woman wearing a straw hat approached her. "Hello, Naomi," she said softly. "Thank you for your courage. Because of you, my daughter believes in herself a little more." Naomi swallowed the lump rising in her throat. "I only did what any mother would do." "But not every mother stands up," the woman replied gently. "You stood up for many." Malik and Zion held her hands, proud, shy, unsure, as if they weren't used to seeing people recognize their mother this way. Then Ali, their neighbor's kid, charged across the grass and grabbed Malik, pulling him into the middle of an intense soccer game. Just like that, Malik's smile burst wide open, bright as sunlight breaking through clouds. Naomi's heart loosened. Then she heard another voice, small, timid. "Zion, do you want to play with us?" Zion glanced at her, his eyes full of questions. Naomi knelt down, brushed his soft curls. "You don't have to be scared anymore. I'm right here, and this park will always belong to us." After a moment of hesitation, Zion nodded. He set his stuffed deer gently on a bench, then ran toward the group of children. The first sound of his laughter carried across the playground. Soft at first, fragile, but pure enough to make Naomi's chest tighten. She took a seat beneath the shade of a tall maple tree. From here, she could see everything. Malik racing after the ball, Zion giggling as he chased other kids, families chatting peacefully. Life is moving forward as though the dark day had never happened. But Naomi knew the memory was still there. A crack in the glass, but also a reminder. A park security guard, a middle-aged man, approached slowly, respectfully. "Ms. Reynolds," he said quietly, "I just wanted to apologize, not for something I did, but for what you had to endure." Naomi studied his face. "Thank you. Not everyone is brave enough to say that." He sighed, the kind of sigh that carries the weight of 3 daughters. "I have kids, girls, and I hope, if they ever face something unjust, someone like you will stand up for them." Her heart swelled. She nodded, unable to find words strong enough. A breeze swept through, shaking the leaves overhead. Nature's own quiet applause. Naomi let her body soften for the first time in weeks. She leaned back against the bench, inhaling the air she once feared she might never be able to breathe here again. The sun began to dip, painting the grass in gentle orange. Malik passed the ball to Zion so he could score. Zion laughed, bright, unburdened, the kind of laugh only children can make when fear has finally loosened its grip. Naomi whispered to herself, to the sky, to every mother who has ever trembled in the dark. No one has the right to take our peace away. No one. A small group approached her, mothers from the community forum she had spoken at. They didn't speak. They simply sat beside her in quiet solidarity. Their presence, steady, unyielding, said everything. You are not alone anymore. Naomi smiled, a real smile, wide and unbroken, and in that moment, she understood something profound. Victory wasn't in applause, headlines, or court filings. Victory was seeing her children laugh without fear. Victory was a community standing together. Victory was reclaiming this park, not with force, but with presence. Evening light spilled across the grass like a blessing. Naomi watched her sons play under the golden sky and thought, "We've taken back what is ours." And in that moment, her heart finally felt at peace. By the time the sunset stretched over the park like a warm blanket, Naomi stood there and realized her fight wasn't truly over, but it had changed. It was no longer fear, no longer loneliness, no longer the blows thrown from the shadows. Now it was strong, resolve. And the unity of people from every corner, people who had also been dismissed, judged, pushed into dark corners simply because they were different. Naomi's story is not a miracle. It is the raw truth of America today. A place where a black mother takes her children to the park can become a target. A place where peace always has a price. A place where truth only sees the light if someone is brave enough to stand, knowing that standing means facing the storm. But the most beautiful part of her story. That's not how Naomi won. It's how she refused to let pain turn her into someone else. She didn't seek revenge. She didn't scream. She didn't let her heart turn to stone. She chose to stand, so justice could stand with her. She chose to speak, so other children wouldn't endure what her sons endured. She chose truth, when silence was what they wanted. She chose love, when the world tried to tear her apart. And that choice changed everything. If you're watching this video, ask yourself, how many Naomis out there have never been heard? How many Maliks and Zions are growing up afraid of being misunderstood, afraid of being seen as a threat? How many black mothers swallow their tears every day, trying to keep their families safe while the world is always ready to question them? Stories like this are not just meant to be watched. They are meant to remind us. Truth does not walk into the light on its own. Someone must carry it there. Justice does not appear by itself. Someone must rise for it. And change never happens automatically. It needs a community. If Naomi's story made you hurt, made you angry, made you empathize, or made you hopeful, then you're feeling exactly what you're supposed to feel. Because this is the reality so many people live through every single day. And if you want to understand more about the hidden corners of racism in America, stories the news won't tell you but the people live with every day, then you're in the right place. Subscribe to Racist Reality right now. Because every video here isn't just a story. It's a reminder that we are not allowed to look away. Hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, and don't leave yet. Watch the next video. There are stories even more painful, more unjust, more powerful, and you need to see them. Because the world only changes when we dare to look straight at the things no one wants to look at. Thank you for watching until the end. Thank you for feeling this story with your whole heart, and we'll see you in the next video of Racist Reality.